welcome to Willy Brandt House, the headquarters of the Germany's centre-left Social Democrats Party. Behind us, we have a press conference going on at the moment in which the SPD, after more than 5 months since the German election, are in the process of announcing that their members, their 463,000 members, have voted in favour of joining a coalition government with German Chancellor Angela Merkel's Conservatives. And that means that after all of these waiting, after all of those negotiations and failed talks, that Germany is going to have a new grand coalition government with Angela Merkel at the helm. I'll just talk you through a bit of the context shortly, but first let's just walk through. You'll see at the top above this press conference as it goes on, I'm just keeping my voice down here, members of the party who heard about this result a short time before this press conference started, and then we just about could hear the applause, so I think there was a sense here in the press room that this announcement was coming. They then made their way out onto the balcony, and the leadership, who has just left now, the leader Olaf Scholz, to make that announcement, but they came out, they made the announcement, announcing that 80% of the SPD membership had voted, that 230,000 or so had said yes, and 120,000 or so no, and that means that 66% of the total voted in favour. So that press conference is just coming to an end now. I think we can probably walk through this way and just get to the front of the stage. You'll see obviously a lot of media interest in this event, meaning that all of the German news channels are lined up, bringing in guests and political analysts. We'll just work our way through. Perhaps just to start to talk you through the context of this whole process. One of the things to note, of course, is that countries like Germany used to look upon perhaps countries like Belgium, who used to take a very long time to form their coalition governments, and perhaps sneer slightly. And here we are 5.5 months later, and it has taken a very long time for Germany to get this far. The SPD, of course, had initially said it was not going to join in a coalition government. Its previous leader, Martin Schulz, had said that after posting historically low election results back in September of last year, at the end of September, that the SPD, I'll just bring the camera forward a bit so we're not walking over people, that the SPD would be going back into opposition and reconnecting with its roots. That left Angela Merkel then heading into talks with two other smaller parties, the Free Democrats, the Green Party, but by November those had failed, and that was the only viable alternative for what she saw as a stable government rather than a minority government. What we might be able to do now as I'm talking is just continue to walk you through. We've got various political leaders here who will be talking in German, so I won't bring us too close. But obviously just, reaction from senior party officials here who've come in on a Sunday for this announcement. We're not quite sure what they're saying, but I think I was just talking you through how long it had taken to get this far. A failed set of coalition talks was concluded or broke down in November, and that then brought the SPD back to the table, despite the fact that they'd said they would not do that because they had lost so many votes, and felt that they, instead of going back into a compromise situation with a party that they differ on a number of issues with, that they were better off going back into opposition, reconnecting with their roots and sticking to their principles in opposition rather than being in government. But then we had these coalition talks. The SPD had to give the go-ahead for that back in late January. Their members had voted in favour, but only about 55% or so of delegates, who are representatives of the SPD membership, had voted in favour. That means that effectively the members of the party have actually voted more strongly in favour than the delegates did back in December, and that is despite what has been a very divisive campaign for this party in the build-up to this announcement on Sunday, because senior party members, amongst them the head of the SPD's Youth League, Kevin Kühnert, had actively campaigned, sent out press releases, toured the country to try and persuade a surging membership not to join a grand coalition. And I say a surging membership because new members had signed up, and anecdotally, I know that some of them, were not Social Democrats, were not Social Democrat supporters. Their aim was simply to derail this, to make sure that the SPD voted against going back into a coalition government. That has not happened. We've heard here in the last few minutes that a new grand coalition will take place, that Angela Merkel will be at the helm of that coalition government for the next 3.5 years or so. But it's going to be, I think many would argue, a very different type of grand coalition from the one we had seen over the last 4 years before the election in September. A marriage of convenience, a tenser marriage of convenience than perhaps in the past, where both the CDU, Angela Merkel's party, and her Bavarian allies, the CSU, and the SPD, face divisions from within and increasing tensions between each other. There was a point after, in the last few weeks, when it seemed as though there was a mounting amount of pressure on the Chancellor herself not to continue as the Chancellor of Germany for her full 4-year term. Since then, she has made, a number of cabinet appointments. Amongst those was a man called Jens Spahn, a man who had been very outspoken against particularly the German Chancellor's refugee policies and was seen as a potential rival. Now, whether that was because of pressure within her own party or whether it was a tactic to try and somehow bring potential opponents in from the cold and mute them, if you like, whatever the motive, it does seem to have worked for now, lessen the pressure on the Chancellor in terms of the internal divisions. But still those deep divisions within the SPD as well, and they are going to go forward from here. Shortly before this announcement was made, we heard from the No Grow Co, as it's called, group within the SPD, saying that they now wanted a ballot for members to vote on the leadership of the SPD, which is a suggestion perhaps that they might be looking to do or take a similar tactic to that of what happened in the UK Labour Party when Jeremy Corbyn was seen as really having sort of overturned the leadership of the Labour Party, with another centre-left party in Europe, and brought about it, a new wave of leadership with a very different idea of how to take the country forward. So that is something that even in government, those divisions are not necessarily going to heal straight away, both within the CDU and the SPD. The other thing that I think will become a relevant question in the days ahead, and it is expected that the actual government and the announcing of cabinet positions and the sort of the bits and bobs, the bolts that will actually bring about this new government may conclude by the end of March, towards Easter perhaps. The next question will then be, what exactly will the key policies of this next government be? Yes, there was that coalition agreement between leaders, but that did not always go into every single bit of detail as to what the exact policy would be. So key perhaps to those will be two things. Firstly, the finance ministry, the very powerful German finance ministry in the previous government, overseen by Wolfgang Schäuble, the longest serving parliamentarian in the German parliament, a man who really led German and European policy on austerity throughout not just Germany but throughout the Eurozone, throughout those years of financial crisis. Wolfgang Schäuble was the man who really oversaw that process. That cabinet position, the very powerful German finance ministry, has now been turned over to the SPD, to the Social Democrats, to Olaf Scholz, who we saw standing here just a short while ago. And this is a party that has a very different idea about how the German economy should be led, which has spoken about Germany and Europe abandoning this period of austerity, or this approach of austerity. We know from the coalition agreement already that any new government is likely to be more willing to perhaps spend some of its budget surplus, both at home, potentially abroad as well, if the SPD is able to push for some of its key ideas in terms of increasing the share of the burden that Germany takes across the rest of the European Union. So potentially a significant shift there in policy right at the heart of the German economy, and therefore perhaps leadership on financial issues and the economy across Europe. The other big one I think that people will be talking about in the next few days is the Interior Ministry as well, which was a CDU position that has now been handed over to the CDU's Bavarian sister party, the Christian Social Union. And Horst Seehofer, the man who will be stepping into that chair, is somebody who has pushed for an annual cap on the number of refugees coming into Germany. There has been debate about a key SPD demand, which is family reunification, the idea of allowing those refugees who've already arrived here to be allowed to bring some of their family members with them. These will be key policy debates which this next coalition government now is going to have to work out and finalise beyond just what is in the language, sometimes perhaps slightly fluffy language, of that initial coalition agreement brokered earlier in the year, and give clarity to not just Europe, but a number of countries all around the world who are waiting to see where Germany goes next. And that, with this agreement now finalised, those will be the questions that will be occupying Germany, other countries around the world in the weeks ahead, I think. This is Guy Henderson reporting from Willy Brandt House at the SPD headquarters in Berlin.